A millionaire visits an orphanage, and suddenly, an 11-year-old girl shouts, "I know you." But what he discovers next will change everything. Hidden secrets, a daughter he never knew he had, and that's just the beginning. Want to know how this story ends? Watch now and get ready for a heartwarming reunion that will leave you speechless. Henrique parked his car in front of the orphanage, feeling a mix of emotions. He was there because he had made a significant donation, something his assistant had suggested to improve his public image. What he didn't expect was the nervousness that crept up on him as he watched the children playing in the garden. It had been a long time since he had been around children, maybe not since his own childhood. As he stepped out of the car, Henrique was greeted by the orphanage director, Mrs. Marta. She smiled warmly and thanked him for his generous contribution. "We are so grateful for your help, Mr. Henrique. With your donation, we'll be able to improve the facilities and offer more opportunities for the children," she said. Henrique smiled back, but it was more of a polite smile, mechanical rather than sincere. He was used to receiving praise for his business achievements, but something inside him always felt unsettled. It was a sense of emptiness that no amount of money could ever seem to fill. As they walked inside, Henrique was quickly surrounded by curious children, eager and excited about his visit. Some looked at him with admiration, while others just wanted to know what he did and why he was there. He kindly answered their questions, but in the middle of the crowd, one girl stood out. She wasn't asking anything, just watching him from a distance, her curious eyes studying him closely. Henrique noticed the girl immediately. She looked about 11 years old, with curly brown hair and eyes that seemed much older than her years. There was something in her gaze that made him uncomfortable, as if she knew something he didn't. Mrs. Marta noticed Henrique staring at the girl and said, "Oh, that's Sofia. She's been with us for a few years now. A very special girl, but sometimes a bit distant." Henrique nodded, still looking at Sofia. Then, with sudden determination, the girl walked up to him, her eyes locking onto his. "I know you," she said suddenly, her voice firm yet gentle. "I've seen your picture at my mom's house." Henrique froze. That didn't make sense. He had never been to this orphanage, never seen Sofia before in his life. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked, trying to stay calm, though his heart was racing. Sofia glanced down for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to continue. Then she looked back up at him and said, "My mom had a picture of you. She showed it to me once, but then she got sick, and I came here." Silence fell over the room. The children, who had been laughing and playing moments ago, now stood still, listening. Henrique felt as though the ground had just shifted beneath his feet. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, though he already knew he wasn't prepared for the answer. "Her name was Anna," Sofia said in a trembling voice. "She always talked about you. She said you were important but that you couldn't stay." Henrique blinked several times, trying to process what he was hearing. Anna. The name echoed in his mind like a distant memory. He did remember a woman named Anna, years ago. They had a brief relationship, something that, at the time, seemed casual and unimportant. He was young, focused on building his empire, and eventually, they drifted apart. In his mind, it was just a fleeting romance. But, could this really be possible? "She never told me anything about having a daughter," Henrique muttered, more to himself than to Sofia. Sofia shrugged, clearly unsure. "She didn't talk about it much. She just told me that you were a good person but that you couldn't stay with us." Henrique felt a wave of conflicting emotions. He didn't know what to feel. Confusion, guilt, maybe even anger. Anna never told him anything about a child. How could he have gone all these years without knowing? Mrs. Marta, sensing the heaviness of the conversation, stepped in. "Mr. Henrique, perhaps it would be better to discuss this in private." Henrique nodded, still in shock. He turned back to Sofia, who now looked up at him with a mix of hope and vulnerability. You're saying I'm your father?" he asked, barely able to believe the words coming out of his mouth. Sofia bit her lower lip and nodded. "Yes. I think so. My mom always told me you were my dad." Enrique's world seemed to stop in that moment. He looked around, at the children watching in silence, at Mrs. Marta, who wore a compassionate expression, and finally back at Sofia, who was waiting for a response. But he didn't know what to say. I need some time, he managed to say, his voice shakier than he had expected. I need to understand what's going on. Sofia nodded slowly, as if she had already expected that answer. That's okay. I just wanted you to know. Henrique quickly turned and walked out of the room, his heart pounding uncontrollably. How could this be happening? How could he have a daughter and not know? He ran his hand through his hair, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. As he stepped outside the building, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He knew, somehow, that his life had changed in that instant. But he had no idea just how much more was still to come. Henrique left the orphanage with his mind racing. Sofia's words echoed in his head. My mom said you were my father. How could that be possible? He tried to remember Anna, the last time he saw her. It was a blurry memory, like a dream he had forgotten the moment he woke up. On his drive back home, Henrique made a call. Marina, I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Anna. She worked for me over 11 years ago. Find whatever you can, and make it quick. Marina, his efficient assistant, didn't ask questions. She knew that when Henrique requested something, it was important. He hung up the phone and leaned back in his seat. As he drove through the streets of Sao Paulo, his mind kept drifting back to that brief time in his life. He met Anna when she worked as a maid in his house. She was young, beautiful, and always had a smile on her face, even on the toughest days. They started talking, and what seemed like just a friendship quickly turned into something more. At the time, Henrique was completely focused on expanding his company. He traveled constantly and barely had time for a personal life. His relationship with Anna was short, intimate, casual. When it ended, he never imagined it would have lasting consequences. When Henrique arrived at his luxurious apartment, he tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept returning to the same point. Sofia. Anna. Father. These were words that didn't fit into his life until now. How could Anna have kept something so important from him? Was Sofia really his daughter? Marina called back later that afternoon. I found some information, Mr. Henrique. Anna passed away 3 years ago from a terminal illness. She lived in a more remote part of the city with her daughter. There's no record of other family or close support. It seems that after her death, Sofia was sent to the orphanage. Henrique felt a tightness in his chest. Anna was dead. He didn't know what to expect, but the news still hit him hard. She had spent her last years alone, sick, raising a daughter he never knew existed. Did you manage to find anyone who knew her? Maybe a relative or a friend, he asked, trying to stay calm. Yes. I found a woman named Isabel. She was a close friend of Anna's and helped care for her in her final months. I thought you might want to speak with her. Henrique took a deep breath. He needed answers. Set up a meeting with her as soon as possible. The next day, Henrique met with Isabel at a modest cafe. She was a middle-aged woman, with tired but kind eyes. When she saw Henrique, it seemed like she knew exactly who he was. They exchanged greetings and sat down at a quiet table. So, you're Henrique, Isabel said bluntly. Anna talked about you a few times, but never with resentment. She always said you didn't know. Henrique frowned. Didn't know? Didn't know what? Isabel sighed. She was pregnant when you two separated. She found out shortly after you left, but she decided not to tell you. In her mind, you had bigger and better things to worry about. She thought it would be easier to raise the child on her own. Henrique felt a mix of anger and sadness. She never thought I had the right to know? That I could have helped? She thought about it, Isabel said calmly. But she also knew how focused you were on your work, your career. She thought you would feel tied down to something you didn't choose. Henrique shook his head, trying to process it all. He remembered the time when he and Anna broke up. It was true, he was so consumed with business that he didn't even notice how she was feeling. But he never would have turned his back on a child. He never would have refused to help. Why didn't she ask for help when she got sick? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. She didn't want to be a burden. In the end, she tried to protect Sofia, but she knew the girl needed more than she could give. That's why, when Anna's health started to decline, Sofia was sent to the orphanage. Henrique leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of Isabel's words. All of this had happened while he lived his comfortable life, completely unaware that Anna and his daughter were facing such hardship. Guilt started to swell in his chest. I need to understand more about Sofia, Henrique said, his voice softer now. She told me I'm her father, but how can I be sure? I need to know if there's anything else you can tell me. Isabel looked at him with sadness. Sofia is a special girl. She's smart, strong, and she has her mother's heart. Anna never wanted her to carry the weight of what happened. But now, you're here, and you have the chance to be part of her life. I have no doubt she's your daughter. Anna spoke about you with kindness, even in the hardest moments. She knew that if you found out, you'd do the right thing. Henrique ran a hand over his face, trying to control his emotions. I want to do the right thing, but how do I start? How do I explain to Sofia that I didn't know? How can I be the father she deserves after all this time? Isabel smiled softly. Sofia isn't expecting perfection, Henrique. She just wants to know that you're there for her, that you care. Yes, you've lost a lot of time, but it's not too late. There's still time to make things right. Isabel's words hit him like a gentle, but precise, blow. Henrique realized he was standing at a crossroads. He couldn't change what had already happened, but he could choose what to do moving forward. Thank you, Isabel, he said sincerely. I promise I'll do everything I can to be there for Sofia. She deserves more than what she's had so far. Isabel nodded. I know you will, Henrique. And if you need anything else, I'll be here. Henrique left the cafe with a renewed sense of clarity. He knew there was still so much to understand, so much to resolve, but one thing was clear, he wouldn't let Sofia face the world alone. He would be part of her life, just as he should have been from the beginning. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. In the days following his meeting with Isabel, Henrique couldn't stop thinking about everything he had learned. The fact that Anna had hidden Sofia's existence was already a shock, but there was something in the way Isabel spoke that left him feeling like there was still more to discover. He couldn't shake the feeling that important details were still missing from the story. Meanwhile, he began spending more time with Sofia. The girl was gradually opening up to him. There was a mix of curiosity and caution in her eyes, as if she was still waiting for an explanation as to why he hadn't been in her life for all those years. Henrique knew he would have to face that question soon, but he didn't want to rush things. He wanted to get to know her better before diving into such delicate subjects. One afternoon, as they sat talking at the orphanage, Sofia said something that reignited a sense of mystery in Henrique's heart. I had a brother, Sofia said suddenly, looking down at the ground. Henrique froze. What? A brother? Sofia nodded, though her face showed uncertainty. I'm not sure if it's true. My mom didn't talk about him much. She would only mention, sometimes at night, that I wasn't alone. That somewhere, I had a brother. Henrique felt a chill run down his spine. A brother? He had never known Anna to have another child. Do you know where he is? He asked, trying to keep his composure. No. I don't know if it's even true, Sofia answered, her voice lowering. Sometimes I think it was just a story she told to make me feel better. Henrique sat in silence for a long time, absorbing what Sofia had said. A brother. How could that be possible? Could Anna have had another child with someone else? Or maybe. No, he couldn't believe it. But the seed of doubt had already been planted in his mind. That night, Henrique called Marina, his assistant, and asked her to investigate Anna's past again. This time, He wanted even more specific details, any information about other children besides Sofia. If there was something more, he needed to know. 2 days later, Marina returned with news. Henrique was in his office when she walked in, holding a folder. "Mr. Henrique, I found something you'll want to see." She handed him the folder, and Henrique quickly opened it. Inside were medical records and adoption documents. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. "It's true," Marina said seriously. "Anna had twins. Sofia has a brother. He was given up for adoption shortly after birth." Henrique felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Twins. He had 2 children. 2. The shock was so great that he had to sit down. "Why?" he murmured. "Why would she do that?" "She was in a very difficult situation, Mr. Henrique," Marina explained gently. "The records show that right after giving birth, she experienced serious health complications. She couldn't care for 2 babies on her own. She decided to give one of the children up for adoption, perhaps hoping he would have a better life." Henrique shook his head in disbelief. "But why didn't she tell me? If I had known, I would have helped. I would have done whatever it took." Marina hesitated before answering. "From what I could gather, Anna believed you were too busy with your career. She thought it wasn't something you wanted at the time." Henrique felt a mix of anger and sadness. He understood that Anna had been in a difficult position, but he couldn't stop wondering how his life, and the lives of his children, would have been different if she had just told him the truth. Now, he was left trying to piece together a story that had been kept from him for so long. "Did you find anything about the boy? Where is he now?" Henrique asked urgently. "Yes," Marina said, pulling another document from the folder. "His name is Miguel. He was adopted by a family shortly after he was born. He's living with them in a town not far from here. From what we've gathered, he grew up well and seems to be well adjusted with his adoptive family." Henrique felt a wave of emotions. He wanted to meet the son he never knew existed, but he was also afraid of what that might mean. How would he explain all of this to Miguel? How would the boy react to discovering he had a twin sister and a biological father? Henrique knew this wouldn't be easy. "I need to meet him," he said, determined. Marina nodded. "I can arrange a meeting with the adoptive family if you'd like. But I suggest you proceed with caution. This is a delicate situation, and Miguel is already 11 years old. We don't know how he'll react." Henrique knew Marina was right, but he also knew he couldn't wait. He had already missed 11 years of his children's lives. He couldn't lose any more time. A few days later, the meeting was arranged. Henrique was anxious. He didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain: he needed to meet Miguel. He needed to tell him the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. When he arrived at the adoptive family's home, Henrique felt a nervousness he wasn't used to feeling. He, who had faced enormous challenges in the business world, had never felt so unprepared for a meeting. The door was opened by Marcos, Miguel's adoptive father. He was a kind man, with a look of understanding on his face. "You must be Henrique," he said, shaking Henrique's hand. "Miguel is in the backyard. He doesn't know why you're here yet. We thought it would be best to let you tell him." Henrique nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He followed Marcos to the backyard, where he saw Miguel for the first time. The boy was playing with a dog, laughing loudly, completely unaware of what was about to happen. When Miguel finally noticed Henrique's presence, he stopped playing and looked at him curiously. Henrique felt a pang in his heart as he saw how much Miguel looked like him. The same eyes, the same smile. "Hi, Miguel," Henrique said, his voice a little hesitant. I'm Henrique." Miguel frowned, confused. "Hi," he replied uncertainly. Henrique took a deep breath. "I came here today because I need to tell you something important. Something that you need to know." Miguel kept looking at him, clearly not understanding. You have a twin sister, Miguel. Her name is Sofia. And I'm your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Miguel stared at Henrique, his eyes widening in surprise. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Henrique could see the confusion and shock on the boy's face. "I know this is a lot to process," Henrique said, trying to be as gentle as possible. "But I wanted you to know that I'm here. And that, if you want, I would like to be part of your life." Miguel stayed silent for a few more seconds, and then, without saying a word, he ran inside the house, leaving Henrique alone in the backyard, feeling the weight of the emotions around him. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the orphanage as they ran back and forth, caught up in their games. Sofia, however, sat under a tree with a book open on her lap, though her eyes weren't focused on the words. Ever since the day Henrique told her that he was her father, she had been trying to process this new reality. It was a mix of curiosity and confusion. He was the man in the photo her mother had shown her years ago, but she didn't know how to feel about him now. Henrique had been visiting Sofia regularly since the revelation, but he knew that, even with the frequent visits, building a bond would take time. Each visit was a new beginning, and he tried not to force a connection but also didn't want to seem distant. He was learning how to be a father little by little, and each moment with Sofia was a lesson. That afternoon, he arrived at the orphanage and found Sofia still sitting under the tree. He approached quietly, making no noise, and sat down beside her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was comfortable but filled with unspoken thoughts. "You're not really reading, are you?" he asked, glancing at the book she held. Sofia laughed, a soft, almost shy sound. "No, my mind is somewhere else." Henrique nodded. "I can imagine." He, too, had been lost in thought. Since meeting Miguel, he had been constantly tormented by doubts and uncertainties. The son he never knew now knew the truth, but Miguel's silent rejection still weighed heavily on his heart. "Have you thought about what I told you, about your brother?" Henrique asked, carefully breaking the silence. Sofia looked up at him, her eyes curious. "Yes, but it still feels strange, you know? I always wondered if it was true, but now that it is, I don't even know how to feel." Henrique understood that feeling. All of this was new and overwhelming, not just for her but for him as well. Miguel needs time. It's not easy to suddenly discover that you have a sister and a father. "I didn't know what was happening either, Sofia. And I'm still learning how to deal with all of this." Sofia nodded in understanding. "I get it. He must be confused. I am too." Henrique looked at his daughter and felt a mix of pride and sadness. She was more mature than he had imagined, carrying a wisdom he didn't often see in children her age. At the same time, he felt guilty for not being there to help her grow and face the challenges she had clearly faced on her own. "You know," Henrique began, trying to find the right words, "I never imagined I'd be sitting here with you after all these years. I didn't know you existed, and now that I do, I want to do things right. I want to be here." Sofia looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I like it when you visit me," she said, almost in a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if you had been there from the start." Those words hit Henrique like a knife. He wondered the same thing constantly. How would Sofia's life have been different if he had known about her? If he had been there from the beginning? He tried to hide the pain in his expression, but he knew Sofia was too perceptive not to notice. "I wish I had been there too," he said, his voice low and filled with sincerity. "But what matters now is that I'm here. And I want to keep being here, if you'll let me." Sofia smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I want you to be around. It still feels kind of strange to me, but I like spending time with you." Henrique felt warmth spread through his chest. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something important. He knew he still had a long way to go, but the simple fact that Sofia wanted him around was already a victory. In the days that followed, Henrique continued visiting Sofia, and with each visit, they grew closer. He brought books, snacks, and sometimes they just sat together in silence. He began to notice that Sofia was a very observant girl, always analyzing the things around her with a quiet curiosity. He liked that about her. She seemed to absorb the world, much like he used to do when he was young. One day, as they were walking through the orphanage's garden, Sofia suddenly stopped and looked at him. "Do you think Miguel will want to meet me?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Henrique stopped too, turning to face her. He didn't want to lie. "I hope so, Sofia. But I think we need to give him some time. This is all very new to him. I understand if he's confused or even scared." Sofia nodded slowly, processing what he had said. "I want to meet him. I've always wondered if it was true, you know? Having a brother, and now, I know he's real. It's strange, but I want to meet him." Henrique knelt down to be at her eye level, holding her hands. "We will meet him, Sofia. He needs time, but when he's ready, you'll have the chance to meet your brother. And I'll be there with you, always." Sofia smiled slightly, with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. Henrique knew this was important to her. The idea of having a twin brother stirred something deep within her imagination. He understood that, and he would do everything he could to make sure that when the time came, she was ready. As the bond between Henrique and Sofia grew stronger, Miguel remained silent. Henrique had tried to reach out to him again, but the adoptive family had asked for more time. Miguel, it seemed, was struggling with the truth more deeply than Sofia. Henrique knew he couldn't force the reunion. He had to give space, but the waiting was painful. Every night, Henrique thought about his two children. He knew, in some way, he had failed them both. He hadn't been there when they needed him, and now he was trying to make up for lost time, but he didn't know if it would be enough. Still, he was determined to do whatever it took to regain that time. Henrique finally understood that this wasn't just about showing up out of nowhere and expecting things to resolve themselves. He needed to be patient, to nurture this relationship like a plant that grows slowly, watering it with time and the care he hadn't been able to give in the past. It would be a long road ahead, but he was ready to take every step. And as he walked beside Sofia, he knew that despite everything, he had been given a second chance. A chance he wasn't going to waste. The days passed slowly since that meeting in the backyard, and Miguel still couldn't process everything he had learned. The revelation that he had a twin sister and that his biological father was trying to reconnect was too much for him. He had never felt so confused in his entire life. Since Henrique had shown up at his house, Miguel had become more withdrawn. The once easy and affectionate relationship with his adoptive parents now felt heavy. He couldn't look at them the same way anymore. It was as if everything had changed in a matter of seconds. Every time he thought about Sofia, he felt a mix of curiosity and fear. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to discover that his entire life was just a piece of a story he didn't even know existed. Miguel spent hours sitting by his bedroom window, watching the world outside, trying to make sense of it all. His adoptive parents, Marcos and Laura, respected his space and didn't push him. They knew he needed time. Above all, they loved him deeply and were afraid of what this new reality might mean for their family. Meanwhile, Henrique was living through his own inner conflicts. He had given the time that Miguel's family requested, but the wait was agonizing. He wanted to get to know his son, to learn about his life, his interests, who he was. Sofia was anxious too. She asked about Miguel every day, but Henrique, with the patience he was learning to cultivate, always said, "Soon, sweetheart. Miguel will be ready soon." Finally, Henrique decided he couldn't wait any longer. He called Marcos and Laura and asked if he could visit Miguel again, this time without any expectations. He just wanted to spend time with his son, without forcing any sort of reconnection. Laura, hesitant at first, agreed. "Miguel has been more closed off, but I think a visit might do him some good. Just take it slow." That afternoon, Henrique arrived at Miguel's house with his heart racing. He knew this meeting would be delicate, but he also knew it had to be done. He couldn't give up on Miguel, not after finding out that he existed. Marcos greeted him at the door with a firm handshake, but he looked more concerned than he had during their last meeting. "Miguel's in his room," he said, uncertainty etched on his face. "He's been spending a lot of time alone since you came. I hope your visit today helps him come out of his shell a bit." Henrique took a deep breath and climbed the stairs, each step heavy with anticipation and nerves. When he reached Miguel's bedroom door, he knocked gently. No response. He tried again. "Miguel, it's me. Henrique. Can I come in?" After a long moment of silence, a low voice replied, "You can." Henrique entered slowly, as if stepping into someone's private world. Miguel was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring out the window, just as he did every day. He didn't look at Henrique right away. The room was simple, with sports posters on the walls and books scattered across the desk. It was the typical room of an 11-year-old boy, but for Henrique, it was an entirely new world. He knew almost nothing about Miguel, but he was determined to learn. "I wanted to check in on you," Henrique said, sitting down on a chair near the bed. "I know all of this is new for you. It's new for me too." Miguel kept looking out the window, saying nothing. "I know you must be confused," Henrique continued, trying to keep his voice calm. "And I'm not here to force anything. I just wanted to see you, talk for a bit. No rush." The silence in the room was heavy, but Henrique didn't give up. He knew he would need patience. So, he decided to change the subject, to try and find common ground. "Your room is cool. I was really into sports when I was your age. Soccer, mostly. Do you like soccer?" Miguel finally looked at him, but his expression was hard to read. "Yeah, I like it. But I prefer basketball." Henrique smiled slightly. "Basketball's great too. I played a bit in school, but I was never very good." He let out a short laugh, trying to break the tension, but Miguel just nodded and turned back to the window. Henrique felt the tension rise again, but he didn't give up. "I know this is a lot for you, Miguel. Finding out you have a sister, that I'm your biological father, it's a lot to take in." Miguel bit his lip, still not looking directly at Henrique. "Why didn't you look for me?" he asked, his voice low but filled with hurt. The question hit Henrique hard. He had expected it, but hearing it directly from Miguel was still painful. "I didn't know you existed," Henrique said, his voice firm but sincere. "I only found out the truth recently. If I had known, Miguel, I would have looked for you a long time ago." Miguel clenched his fists, still not fully turning around. "Why did Sofia stay with my mom and not me? Why did she stay, and I had to leave?" Henrique felt his heart break. He understood that question. He knew Miguel was feeling the weight of abandonment, and even though it wasn't his fault, he had to address that pain. "Your mother, Anna, she went through a lot of difficulties. When you and Sofia were born, she was very sick and didn't have much help. She couldn't take care of 2 babies on her own. Giving you up for adoption was a decision she made because she thought it was the best thing for you. She wanted you to have a chance at a good life, a life with a family who could care for you." Miguel finally turned around, his eyes filled with tears he was trying hard to hold back. "But she didn't want me. She wanted Sofia and not me." Henrique moved closer, kneeling in front of Miguel, feeling his son's pain as if it were his own. "She wanted both of you, Miguel. I know it's hard to understand, but her decision was made out of love. She thought she was giving you the best chance to be well cared for. I know it hurts, and I'm so sorry that it happened this way." Miguel looked at Henrique for a long moment, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "I wish she had chosen me." With a heavy heart, Henrique pulled Miguel into a hug. At first, Miguel resisted, but soon he gave in, letting himself be held by the father he barely knew, but who, in that moment, he needed. "She loved you, Miguel. And I'm here now. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." The two stayed like that for a while, until Miguel gently pulled away. He wiped his tears with the sleeve of his shirt and looked down at the floor. "Do you think Sofia will like me?" Henrique smiled, relieved to finally see a glimmer of hope. I'm sure she already likes you, Miguel. She's excited to meet you. Miguel nodded slowly, still processing everything. I want to meet her too. But slowly. Henrique agreed, feeling a small victory in his chest. Slowly. We won't rush anything. Miguel didn't say anything else, but the silence that followed was lighter than before. Henrique knew the road ahead was still long, but this was the first step. He now had the chance to start over, to build the relationship that had never existed with his son, and to make sure that both Miguel and Sofia knew they would never be alone again. The sun shone brightly in the sky as Henrique drove to the orphanage, feeling a growing nervousness in his chest. It was the day Sofia had been eagerly awaiting, the day she would finally meet Miguel, her twin brother. Despite Sofia's excitement and hope, Henrique knew this meeting wouldn't be easy. Miguel was still processing everything and had asked for patience, which Henrique deeply respected. As Henrique drove, Sofia, sitting in the passenger seat, gazed out the window, her eyes filled with anticipation. She had spent weeks imagining what it would be like to see Miguel for the first time. She wondered if he looked like her, if he liked the same things, if they would get along. What she feared most was that Miguel wouldn't like her. Henrique smiled, trying to reassure her. I think he's just as excited to meet you as you are to meet him. It'll be okay, sweetheart. Remember, he's nervous too. Sofia nodded, but she still looked worried. Henrique knew it was a lot of pressure for both of them. They had been separated for so long, and now, the expectation of reconnecting could be overwhelming. When they arrived at the orphanage, they were greeted by Mrs. Marta, who was aware of the special meeting taking place that day. Sofia fidgeted nervously, playing with her fingers as she waited in the garden. Moments later, the car belonging to Marcos and Laura, Miguel's adoptive parents, pulled up in front of the orphanage. Miguel stepped out slowly, glancing around cautiously. He was still coming to terms with everything he had learned in the past few weeks, and the nervousness was clear in his eyes. When Sofia saw him, her eyes widened. He really did look like her. It was like looking at a reflection, but a reflection she had never known. Miguel, Sofia whispered, as if saying his name aloud was the only way to confirm this was real. Miguel stood still for a moment, staring at Sofia with the same surprise. He knew he had a twin sister, but seeing someone who looked so much like him was a strange feeling. It was as if he were seeing a part of himself that had always been missing. Sensing the hesitation between them, Henrique stepped forward, trying to ease the tension. Sofia, this is Miguel, he said with an encouraging smile. And Miguel, this is your sister, Sofia. The two stared at each other in silence for a few more seconds, as if they were studying one another. Then, in a sudden act of bravery, Sofia took a step forward and extended her hand. Hi, she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed the emotion she was feeling. I've been waiting a long time to meet you. Miguel looked at her outstretched hand and, after a moment of hesitation, took it. Hi, me too, he replied, still cautious, but with a slight smile on his face. Henrique let out a quiet sigh of relief. It was a small gesture, but it was the beginning. The first step for the two to start forming the bond that had been denied to them for so long. The next few minutes were filled with tentative conversation between the siblings. They started to get to know each other, but everything was done with great care. Miguel was still nervous, but slowly, he seemed to relax around Sofia. They sat together on a bench in the garden, talking about simple things, their favorite hobbies, what they did in their free time, their favorite sports. For Henrique, it was emotional to witness that moment of connection, even though it was just the beginning. However, Miguel still carried emotional baggage that couldn't be ignored. Even as he warmed up to Sofia, there was something inside him that kept him from fully embracing the moment. The feeling of abandonment still haunted him, like a shadow he couldn't shake. He knew it wasn't Sofia's fault, but the situation was too overwhelming to process all at once. At one point, while Sofia laughed at a joke Miguel had made, the boy looked at Henrique, his expression serious. I still don't understand why my mom did this, he said, suddenly breaking the light tone of the conversation. Sofia's smile faded, and Henrique, hearing the question, felt the weight return to his heart. It was the question Miguel had asked before, and Henrique knew he would continue to ask until he found some peace. "Miguel," Henrique began, approaching carefully, "I understand how you feel. Your mother was in a very difficult situation, and she did what she thought was best for you and Sofia. She didn't want you to feel abandoned, I'm sure of that. But it was a decision made in a moment of desperation." Miguel shook his head, his expression hard. "But I was abandoned. I was given to another family while Sofia stayed. That doesn't make sense. I just wish she had chosen me too." Sofia looked down at the ground, clearly affected by her brother's words. She had always wondered why her mother had made that decision, but she had never had the courage to ask directly. Now, hearing Miguel speak, she realized she felt part of that pain as well. Their separation had affected them both in different ways. Henrique knelt down in front of them, looking into Miguel's eyes. "I understand what you're feeling, and I wish I could explain it better, but the truth is, we don't have all the answers. What I can tell you, Miguel, is that your mother loved you. And I'm here now, trying my best to be with you and Sofia. We have a chance to start over, as a family." Miguel looked at Henrique, his eyes filling with tears he was trying to hold back. He wanted to believe those words, to trust that what Henrique was saying was true. But at the same time, the pain of being separated from his sister for so long was an open wound that wouldn't heal easily. Sofia, sensing the tension in the air, placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "I know it's hard," she said softly. "But I always thought about you. Even when I thought you were just a story mom told to comfort me, I always wanted to meet you. And now that we're here, I want us to really get to know each other. Can we try?" Miguel looked at his sister, and in that moment, something in his expression softened. He was still confused and hurt, but seeing Sofia there, so close, so much like him, caused a part of his resistance to fade. He nodded slowly, without saying anything, but the gesture was enough for Sofia to understand that he was willing to try. Henrique, watching the scene, felt a sense of relief and hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a small step forward, but it was exactly what he needed to see to keep fighting for the family that was starting to come together. In the days following that meeting, Henrique began taking Miguel and Sofia on outings. Nothing extravagant, just simple moments like trips to the park or ice cream shops, where the two could get to know each other better without the pressure of high expectations. Slowly, Miguel and Sofia began to create a routine together, sharing stories and laughter. Miguel still carried part of his pain, but he was starting to let Sofia into his life. For Henrique, every small progress was a victory. He knew there was still a long way to go, but the simple fact that Miguel was willing to try was all he could ask for at that moment. One day, as the three of them walked through the park, Miguel looked at Henrique and said, without ceremony, "You're going to keep coming, right? Even after all this?" Henrique looked at his son and smiled, feeling his heart warm. "I'll keep coming, Miguel. Always." And with that, they continued walking together, side by side, as a family that, though full of scars, was beginning to heal. The sky was overcast on the day Henrique decided to take Sofia and Miguel to the town where Ana had grown up. He knew this trip would be important, not just for the children, but for himself as well. It was an opportunity to find more answers about the past, about the decisions Ana had made, and maybe, just maybe, to better understand the conflicting emotions that Miguel still carried. Sofia was excited, but Miguel, as usual, was quieter, lost in thought. They left early, with Henrique driving in silence while the children watched the landscape change as they left the big city behind. The journey to the small village where Ana spent her childhood seemed long, but Henrique knew it was necessary. Glancing in the rearview mirror, he saw Sofia trying to smile at her brother, hoping to ease the tension in the air. Although Miguel had begun to open up a little more since their last meeting, there was still a lot unresolved between them. "Have you ever been here before, Dad?" Sofia asked, breaking the silence. Henrique shook his head. "No, I've never been here. But I know this town was important to your mother. She grew up here. It's where a lot of things happened before I met her." Miguel continued to stare out the window, but Henrique knew he was listening. He respected his son's need for space and knew Miguel would speak when he was ready. When they finally arrived in the town, there was a peaceful and nostalgic atmosphere. It was a small village, with cobblestone streets and old houses. The air was fresh, and the silence was almost palpable, broken only by the sound of the wind in the trees. Henrique parked the car in front of a house that looked like it had been vacant for some time. The paint was peeling, and the garden, once full of flowers, was now overrun with weeds. But even so, there was a melancholic beauty about the place. "This was your mother's house," Henrique said as he stepped out of the car. Sofia and Miguel got out as well, observing the place with curiosity. Sofia seemed fascinated, trying to imagine what her mother's life must have been like here, when she was young. Miguel, on the other hand, seemed more distant, as if trying to shield himself from the emotions that were beginning to surface. They walked through the rusty gate and made their way to the garden. Henrique watched as the children explored the place in silence. He knew Ana had often spoken about the garden, how she loved taking care of the flowers, but now, all that remained was a field of weeds and wilted plants. It was as if time had stood still, waiting for this moment. "Did she take care of these flowers?" Sofia asked, kneeling to touch a wilted rose. Henrique nodded, moving closer. "She always talked about the garden. She said this was the place where she felt most at peace. Taking care of the flowers helped her forget her problems." Miguel, still standing off to the side, watched from a distance. He seemed uncomfortable, unsure of how to fit into the moment. Henrique felt the weight of that. He knew Miguel was still struggling with the unanswered questions about Ana's decision to separate them. He knew his son couldn't easily accept that everything had been done out of love. It was hard to understand what Ana had gone through and why she had made the choices she did. "Do you want to go inside?" Henrique suggested, trying to ease the mood. Sofia nodded, excited, but Miguel just shook his head, looking reluctant. Even so, Henrique didn't push. They entered the house, which was empty and a bit dusty, but still carried the spirit of the place. The walls had marks where pictures once hung. The kitchen, simple, seemed to have been the heart of the home, where Ana and her family had probably spent many moments together. As they walked through the rooms, Sofia found something curious. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a small wooden box on a shelf. Henrique came over and took the box from the shelf. Opening it, he found letters and some old photos. He recognized Ana in one of the pictures, still young, smiling at the camera while tending to her garden. Next to her was an older man, likely her father, and a woman who seemed to be her mother. It was an image of a time Henrique had never known, but it was now part of his children's history. He pulled out one of the letters and began reading it silently. The handwriting was Ana's, and as he read, it felt as if he were hearing her voice again. The letter spoke about her pregnancy and the challenges she faced. She mentioned her fear of not being able to care for both children, of failing them, and the painful decision to give Miguel up for adoption. Henrique remained silent for a moment, letting Ana's words sink into his heart. She had been so alone back then. And now, all that was left were her words on a piece of paper yellowed by time. "She wrote about us?" Miguel asked, finally approaching Henrique, his voice low and full of uncertainty. Henrique looked at him, his eyes filled with compassion. "Yes, she wrote about both of you. About how much she loved you. And how hard it was for her to make the decision she did." Miguel swallowed hard, looking at the letter in Henrique's hands. He seemed torn between the anger he still felt and the pain of finally understanding what his mother had gone through. He didn't know how to process it all. Sofia, sensing her brother's tension, stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "She loved you, Miguel. Even though you didn't stay with her, she never forgot you." Miguel looked at his sister, his eyes brimming with tears he was trying to hold back. He was still grappling with feelings of abandonment, but now, he was beginning to understand that his mother hadn't left him out of a lack of love. She had done what she thought was best for him. Seeing Miguel's emotional state, Henrique put the letter back in the box and knelt in front of his two children. You two are all that's left of Anna. And, no matter how hard her life was, she left me the greatest gift she could. She left me you. And I'm going to honor that. Miguel nodded slowly, still processing the emotions he was feeling. But now, there was something different in his eyes. Something Henrique hadn't seen before. Perhaps it was acceptance. Or at least, the beginning of it. Later, they left the house and went to a nearby hill, where a lone tree stood at the top. Henrique knew this had been Anna's favorite place when she was young. Isabel, Anna's friend, had told him about it. It was where Anna would go when she needed peace. They sat under the shade of the tree, looking out at the horizon. Sofia, ever curious, gazed at the field in front of her, while Miguel seemed calmer than before. Henrique felt grateful for the moment. As difficult as it had been, he knew they were beginning to heal the wounds that had been open for so long. Did you know your mother used to come here whenever she was sad or confused? Henrique said, looking at the two of them. She said this place helped her clear her thoughts. Sofia smiled, as if imagining Anna sitting there, thinking about life. Miguel just nodded, but there was something different in his expression. As if, in some way, he was beginning to understand what his mother had gone through. What are you thinking, Miguel? Sofia asked, curious. Miguel looked at his sister and then at his father. He took a deep breath, as if ready to let something out. I think I'm ready to try. To accept that things happened the way they did. I still don't understand everything, but I think Mom did the best she could. Henrique felt a wave of relief and emotion. He knew this didn't mean all of Miguel's pain had disappeared, but it was an important step. A step toward healing. That's all that matters, son, Henrique said softly. We're all trying. And together, we'll make it. Miguel looked at Sofia, and the two shared a shy smile. They still had much to learn about each other, but the path to reconciliation had already begun. In that moment, under the shade of the tree Anna had loved so much, Henrique felt that, for the first time, he was on the right path. His children were there, and despite all the scars and difficulties, they had a chance to start anew. A chance to be a real family. The air felt lighter on the drive home. Henrique drove in silence, but the atmosphere in the car was different. He could feel that something had changed. Sofia, sitting in the front passenger seat, was quiet, but the faint smile on her face showed she felt more at ease. Miguel, in the back seat, was calm, gazing out the window, absorbing everything they had experienced in their mother's hometown. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, rather, it was the kind of silence that signaled peace, as though all the words spoken during the trip had finally found their place. After months of uncertainty, pain, and confusion, Henrique felt like he was finally seeing his children begin to truly bond. He knew there was still much work to be done and that the wounds of the past wouldn't heal overnight, but the simple fact that Miguel and Sofia were together meant they were on the right path. Do you think we could go back there someday? Sofia asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I'd like to take care of Mom's garden. Make it beautiful again. Henrique smiled, touched by the idea. Of course, we can go back, sweetheart. That place is a part of you, and if it's important to you, we'll take care of the garden together. Sofia nodded, satisfied, and Miguel glanced into the rearview mirror, also nodding in agreement. Henrique noticed that, although Miguel wasn't much of a talker, he was beginning to find a space where he felt comfortable with the new dynamic they were creating. That was all Henrique could hope for. In the weeks following the trip, life began to settle into a more stable rhythm. Henrique made it a priority to spend as much time as possible with both Sofia and Miguel, involving them in activities that helped them get to know each other better. He knew the bond between siblings needed to be built with patience, and he was willing to give them the time they needed. Sofia and Miguel, in turn, were beginning to feel more at ease in each other's presence. The first time they went to the park to play basketball was a significant moment. Miguel, who had always loved the sport, invited Sofia to play with him, and her enthusiastic response helped them connect in a simple but meaningful way. the shared laughter and playful teasing as they played showed Henrique that, despite all the lost time, the two were ready to start again as brother and sister. One day, after another afternoon at the park, Henrique took the two for ice cream at a nearby shop. Sitting around a small table, they talked more freely. Sofia animatedly discussed her plans for the future, while Miguel listened intently, occasionally adding his own thoughts. It was a simple scene, but Henrique knew moments like these were crucial in building the bond they had been denied. "I've been thinking," Sofia began between spoonfuls of ice cream, "maybe we could do something really fun together. Like, I don't know, a trip or something?" Miguel looked at her, curious. "What kind of trip?" Sofia shrugged, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Maybe we could go somewhere we've never been before. You know, create a new memory. Just the three of us." Henrique's heart warmed at the thought. It was exactly what he had hoped for, that his children would want to create memories together, that they would want to be a real family. He smiled, feeling a lightness in his chest. "I think that's a great idea. We can plan something for the next vacation. What do you think?" Miguel smiled shyly, nodding in agreement. "I'm in." Sofia leaned across the table, excited. "Me too. It's going to be so much fun." Henrique looked at both of them, feeling a quiet happiness wash over him. He couldn't help but wonder what Anna would think if she were there, watching her children finally come together, reconnecting in a way she had never been able to provide. He hoped that wherever she was at peace knowing her children were together and being cared for. The afternoon was drawing to a close, and as they left the ice cream shop, Miguel unexpectedly pulled Henrique aside while Sofia walked ahead, distracted by a game on her phone. "Dad," Miguel said, using the word for the first time without hesitation. I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on me." Henrique stopped, surprised by the statement. He looked at Miguel, who was gazing at him seriously. The boy had fought hard to reach this point, and seeing Miguel finally call him Dad without reservations was something Henrique wasn't sure would ever happen. Henrique knelt down to be at eye level with his son and placed his hands on Miguel's shoulders. "I would never give up on you, Miguel. Never. And I'm so happy you're here, with me and your sister. We still have a long way to go, but I want you to know that I'm here for whatever you need. Always." Miguel smiled slightly, the kind of smile that Henrique rarely saw but that always meant so much. He nodded, and then the two continued walking, catching up to Sofia, who was still distracted by her phone, unaware of the special moment that had just passed between father and son. Time went on, and the routine that had once been marked by uncertainty and confusion transformed into something more stable, filled with small joys. Sofia and Miguel, with their very different personalities, began to find a rhythm together, and Henrique finally felt at peace watching them grow closer. That Sunday afternoon, Henrique stood by the window of the living room, watching his children play in the yard. They were laughing, playing basketball again, and he could hear their laughter echoing in the air. The sound brought a smile to Henrique's face. He knew this was the life he should have always given them, but despite the lost time, he was determined to be the father they deserved from now on. Suddenly, Sofia burst into the room, out of breath, with a radiant smile on her face. "Dad, come play with us." Henrique laughed. "Me? Play? I'm too old for that." Sofia rolled her eyes, impatient, as Miguel appeared behind her, laughing. "You're not that old. Come on, Dad. Just one game." Henrique looked at them both, seeing the joy, the confidence, and the love they were building together reflected in their faces. He couldn't say no to that request. All right. Just one game." The three of them went outside and started playing, their laughter and playful banter filling the air as the afternoon quickly passed. It was a simple scene, but for Henrique, it was everything he needed. His children were there, by his side, happy. They were a family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Henrique looked at Sofia and Miguel, who were now lying on the grass, out of breath after the game. He sat down beside them, watching the sky with them, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in years. "Do you think Mom is watching this?" Sofia asked suddenly, her voice soft but full of emotion. Henrique looked up at the sky and smiled. "I think so. And I think she's very happy to see you two together." Miguel nodded, gazing at the sky with a thoughtful expression. "I think so too." The silence that followed was full of meaning. They were there, together, as a family who, despite all the challenges, had found a way to heal their wounds and move forward. Henrique knew there was still a long road ahead, but at that moment, as the sun set and his children were by his side, he felt like he had finally found what he had been searching for all along, a new beginning.